Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Dwight Kay, who represents Illinois House District 112, is a second-term member of the Illinois Legislature. His district includes most of Edwardsville, Glen Carbon, Collinsville, Caseyville, and small sections of Granite City and Fairview Heights. During this half hour, Representative Kay and I will be discussing his activities this year in Springfield. Because this is an election year, we'll also be talking about Illinois politics. Representative Kay and I will fit in as much as we can during this half hour. Dwight Kay, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you, Lee.
So, all right, let's just jump right into it. You had an interesting year up at Springfield. What would you say was the value of your time spent there as far as the constituents that you represent in Southern Illinois?
Well, to be very direct in a response to you, I think the activity that I was engaged in was to make sure that the guys who essentially are career politicians are trying to get elected again in 2014 for the next term didn't run wild with our money and overspend. Partially successful, but partially not successful.
Well, you are you're a Republican. Republicans are in the minority in the Illinois Legislature. How much of a minority are you?
Well, we have 47 members
of
the House.
How many?
Of 118.
118. So
yes.
You got 47 of that.
Right.
So you're like around 46%.
Well, it's called a super minority. The other folks across the aisle have a super majority, which means with 71 votes, they simply can have their way with whatever they want in the General Assembly.
Okay, so Republicans have very little to say in the House of Representatives, and it's the same way in the Illinois Senate, isn't it?
It's even worse on the Senate side.
Okay.
The numbers are, with regard to supermajorities, the supermajority on the Senate side is even greater.
It's interesting how over in Missouri, it's just the opposite. That it is the Republicans that are in the vast majority in both houses. But in Illinois, where you are, you don't have a whole lot to say about what the legislation is going to be shaped like, do you?
You have a lot to say, but you don't have any
effect.
With what gets to committee and then on to the floor. Many pieces of legislation which are really good are just killed in rules or killed in committee.
There has been over the years, and it's not recent, I mean this has been going on for a number of years, complaints that the state of Illinois is in bad financial shape and that the legislature continues to spend more than they're taking in, therefore the financial situation gets worse. Is this correct, or is this just talk in the press?
Well, the short answer is it's correct, and all you have to do is do the numbers. This year we passed 4 appropriations bills, none of which were passed based on projected revenues coming into the state. On top of that, we passed a supplemental appropriations bill. That's a level above the 4 approps bills I just mentioned. That supplemental bill could not be afforded. The last thing we did was pass a capital bill, which was of minor nature, but it was $1 billion to help fix roads and bridges and infrastructure. And that will be a rebonding issue. And of course, with our financial condition being as poor as it is, we pay a much higher rate to bond for money than do other states.
I was just asking you before we went on the air what interest rate the state is paying. Why don't you tell them what it was you told me a few minutes ago?
Well, it's three to 4 times greater than our states that neighbor us. And I'm not sure today just exactly what that number is, but it's far, far higher for a state who has a good balance sheet, that is a good revenue stream and less debt, than the state of Illinois, who has a smaller revenue stream for a big state, but has a whole lot more debt.
So right now, in the United States, the 30-year bond is something close to, I think it's less than 3%. you're paying for your debt more than 3%, I
We
gather?
are. That's correct.
Probably more than 6%?
That's correct.
Maybe more than 10%?
Well, I'm not sure that it's more than that, but again, your math when it comes to what your indebtedness is, what your finances are, impacts directly how the bond market looks at your ability to repay. And if they think you will be in a default position, they simply up the percentage rate that you borrow. It's pretty simple math.
Right. I don't know that people fully understand or comprehend what that actually means when these rates are so high, is that huge chunks of tax money that is coming in has to go to pay interest ahead of everything else.
Sure.
That's the first thing. Before they pay $1 a salary, before any road is fixed, that interest has to be paid. Otherwise, they're in default.
That's correct. Let me just give you an example of what the bond markets have done to us in the last year to 18 months. Because our poor financial condition has not gotten any better. In fact, in some circles, we think it's gotten worse. The bond market has said to the state of Illinois, we're not going to give you money unless it's at a prime interest rate. So on every $1 billion that we borrow, we pay an additional $250 million over the lifetime of that loan compared to what it was 5 years ago. That gives you, I think, a fair idea of where we have been and where we're headed today.
Well, to the average citizen, what that means is that there's that number that you just stated, less to be spent on services, less to be spent on fixing roads, less to be fixed, to work on water situations, right?
Precisely.
Right. I mean, that money's going to bankers because the money is borrowed.
Well put.
Now, considering what you've just said, what is the overall state business climate? You're a businessman. You're
Yeah.
vice president of a company yourself.
Correct.
And so you have knowledge of how business in the state of, and a big business, yours is not just some little corner store.
Yeah.
So you have a good idea of what the business climate is in the state of Illinois is. What is your opinion?
Well, the business climate, well, first of all, we need to let your viewers know that the unemployment rate in Illinois is one of the highest in the nation.
That's about what?
I'm not sure what the number is. It changes day to day, but the Labor Department just reported last month that we have, I believe it's the second highest unemployment rate in the nation.
Okay.
Which means that we're not creating jobs, which means that people aren't hiring for one reason or another. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they don't know what their state and state government is going to do next. And I say that in the tax arena.
You mean the business community?
The business community is afraid.
Right.
They're
And
unable.
it's uncertainty. They don't like uncertainty.
Business people plan on a 3, 5, and 10-year basis. Illinois doesn't plan very well at all. And so when business goes to plan and they think about capital expenditures, which includes to some degree the employment of additional people, they're a little bit scared to employ more people and put capital investment in Illinois, not knowing what Illinois is going to send them with respect to a bill for taxes.
Now, do you know of any companies that, when looking at the situation you've just described, have just thrown their hands up and say, we're leaving, we're going to a different state?
Well, in my own district, there's been 8 companies, and those companies are relatively small. And I say that in terms of employees. I don't know what their revenue stream was for the year, their income was, but they had between 10 and 25 employees. Some were in the landscaping business, some were small trucking companies. There was a couple of small manufacturing companies. They're gone. And my understanding was that they decided to take up residence in Missouri. So statewide, it's probably a little bit worse. The Department of Economic and Commerce Department has not published recent numbers, but we know that there has been a slight improvement in the last month in the unemployment rate. But in terms of big job creators coming to Illinois, they're not. In fact, ADM has suggested within the last 6 months, longer than that, back to the first of the year, that it might be beneficial for them to pick up stakes and move over to Iowa. That would be a big loss. So if ADM is thinking about it, I guess you can make the assumption that other companies of like size are doing the very same thing.
It's not just the jobs either. It is the monies that are going into the general revenue fund, right? I mean, that's where you get most of your money that operates the state.
Exactly.
Comes from business operations. So when you have businesses that go to a different state, suddenly not just the jobs disappear, but also the revenue that was going into the fund. Therefore, you even have a larger gap between your intake and your output.
Yeah, let's be clear for the viewers. You're going to have a vacuum here if we're not real careful. We've lost, since 2013, we've lost 1,300,000 people. That's net migration. They've left the state for one reason or another. That's a tax burden of those 1.3 million people that will have to be picked up by other folks. Anytime a business leaves the state of Illinois, I think probably you could say, although most of my friends across the aisle say businesses don't pay any taxes, that's not always the case. I know we pay taxes. The company that I have a hand in running pays taxes. Many companies pay taxes. But if they leave the state of Illinois, that becomes another vacuum that has to be filled with taxes then being spread out to the people who have elected to stay here. So we're talking about a serious problem with respect to state finances.
Right. Now we're going to talk some politics here. There is a Republican candidate for governor, and Mr. Bruce Rauner, I believe is
That's correct.
how his last name is pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you don't speak for him, but as a Republican, what would you hope as governor that he could do to correct some of the situations that you have been describing in the first half of this show?
Well, my greatest hope would be, because he comes from a successful business background, he's a guy that started something at the bottom level and was able to be successful at various levels until he became very successful. And he's done it by using good business sense and I think some very, very good common sense. My conversations with Mr. Rauner have been very productive and encouraging from the standpoint that he understands that Illinois is a big corporation. He understands that it's a corporation that doesn't have anyone directing it. We have no chief executive today. So he understands that role, and I think he could play that role well. He also understands that if he's fortunate enough to be elected, that he's going to have to make some of it the most, I think the toughest, most difficult decisions that any governor in the state of Illinois, in the history of this state, has had to make.
Now, as a Republican, speak about Governor Quinn. What is it that you think that Governor Quinn is not doing or should be doing differently?
Well, I think my comment to people is that good government starts with telling the truth, and I've been disappointed that the governor has not always told the people of the state of Illinois the truth. That's very troubling to me. It would have been better had the governor told us the truth in the state of Illinois so that we knew what we were really dealing with. It would have been good if the governor had led from a business perspective and not added programs willy-nilly to the state budget. And I'm talking about
for example,
all four
do you have
pieces.
Any examples of things that
well,
he's added?
The governor is very good at handing out grants for political programs and projects. And not to say that he's the only one, but he certainly has.
That's a political thing right there.
Well, it's very political.
Democrats, Republicans,
yeah,
hand money from the Treasury to your friends.
Well, but don't mistake, grant money is not money that you simply pick off of trees. That's taxpayer dollars that have been given to the Treasury of the state of Illinois to be used wisely. And this governor, in my opinion, has not used our tax dollars wisely.
Now, what is this anti-violence program of his that's been in the news, and apparently that has been considered not a good thing for him?
Well, let me explain that. There's two pieces to that. The NRI, which stands for the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, is coincidental or connected to the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority. The Neighborhood Recovery Initiative was started in 2010 by the governor. It was his initiative to attack the violence and the crime that was happening in Chicago. $10.5 million came from the General Revenue Fund, and then the governor in, I believe it was September or October of 2010, infused $44 million plus into that fund from his discretionary fund. So we're dealing with a fund now that's big, a grant program of $55.4 million to try and diminish crime in Chicago. The problem was that it wasn't, and again, I shouldn't say just Chicago, it was a statewide program, and the money never left Chicago. It was consolidated in one part of Chicago, and what it turned out to be was sort of a political slush fund. And
Well, there was, as I recall, around the 4th of July holiday, there was something close to 50 shootings in Chicago all over one weekend, or somewhere in that neighborhood.
Well,
so apparently this plan is not, it's not doing what it was supposed to be doing then.
Well, the plan effectually ended as we knew it in 2010, the first part of the year, when the Auditor General came out with a report, a rather scathing report, that the performance of this program was less than effective and suggested some serious impropriety with what the governor had done with the program. Now, when I say the governor,
was it him or the people he handed the money to?
That's what I was going to say. Presumably, since it was his program, he had some control over it. However, we know that there were 3 or 4 people who were very instrumental in how that money was used and how it was spent.
Is there ever accountability for monies that are hard-earned but easily spent?
Well, let me give you an example of what we've just talked about. In the NRI program, checks were cut for, in some cases, very large sums of money, but there was no authorization, at least none that's been produced to me, and I'm involved in the investigation. Checks were cut to various suppliers and providers. There was no authorization for vouchered checks. So you have to begin to wonder what business runs its business on the basis that if someone asks you for money, you just simply write them a check. And the answer to that is no business that wants to stay in business does that. So the program was extraordinarily loose. In my opinion, it was a waste of, well, all of the $55 million wasn't spent, but a good part of it was wasted in my view, and that's taxpayer dollars that essentially the governor could not account for and still can't account for.
Let's switch subjects to infrastructure, because everybody talks nowadays about infrastructure, although this program has been talking about it for the last 14 years. Roads, the president has said, he's just said it out, that roads are falling apart. They're not quite falling apart in the United States, but they need attention. Roads are like teeth. You have to maintain them on a regular basis. We also have electric infrastructure that needs to be continuously maintained. What can you say about, I understand that there was a $1 billion appropriation made towards road and infrastructure for the state of Illinois?
Well, that's what I mentioned, I think, at the beginning of the program, was that after we had overspent money on the 4 appropriations bills that were passed, then we passed a supplemental bill we couldn't pay for, then we Then we attacked a problem in Illinois, which has to do with the maintenance of roads, bridges, and our infrastructure, by the way, which I think is important. We have a problem in the state. And I don't know how large a problem it is, because if you travel up in Chicago and the Chicago area, they've spent a lot of money up there maintaining that particular part of the state. And maybe rightfully so. There's a lot of cars, trucks, a lot of traffic up there because the population. A lot of truck traffic.
I guess Interstate 70 and Interstate 64, those are the two downstate
That's correct.
highways that need to be maintained. And 70 is one of the most critical arteries in the country, since it runs all the way from, from New York or Pennsylvania all the way out to
Pennsylvania,
out to Utah.
Yeah. So your question about how important it is, it's very important. But keep in mind, Lee, that we have a unique perspective here, I should say a unique way of how we do business to fund our roads. And let's keep in mind that we are only one of 3 states that has a sales tax on top of an excise tax that is supposed to go to fund roads and bridges.
You mean part of the gasoline?
Yes.
Yes.
And
when you pay gasoline, you pay sales tax.
Well, you pay sales. We pay 6.25% on top of the excise tax, and a few other add-ons which are there, and I don't know that they're all that critical to maintaining the budget. But the sales tax is, and the problem is we don't keep that sales tax in the road fund, and that's a big problem. We take the road fund and we use it as kind of an omnibus payables fund. If we want to pay workers' compensation claims in the state of Illinois for state workers, we use the road fund. If we want to grant money, it'll come out of the road fund. If we have special
So it's not segregated, is what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that the road fund in and of itself is there, and it's funded.
Right.
But what I am saying is that all the monies that go into that fund are not used for maintaining roads and bridges.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The money is obviously not segregated then, so that it is dedicated to the purpose for which it's being held.
And that's exactly what I'm saying.
I see. Now, let's move on to school funding. Let's just talk about local schools in your district.
Sure.
Are they being funded properly, or are they still awaiting state funds that they're currently owed?
Well, let's begin with what happened this year and work backwards. This year, the governor decided to keep the budget much as it was last year. So in the case of Collinsville and Edwardsville and Fairview and Granite City, they're going to receive essentially the same general state aid that they've received in the past, which is 90%, and it's a prorated amount, 90% of what really they should get, and that's 100%. So school systems now are going to be working with about $600 per student less than they should be. And I guess that's no surprise, because that's been happening for the last few years.
Let's pause there for a second. What you're saying, that there is a formula, and that's 100%.
Correct.
Per student, right?
Right, $6,100.
But in fact, the budget now is not for the 100%, it's for 90% of the 100%.
That's correct. So in other words, we're asking our school districts to do more with far less.
10% less.
That's right.
Okay. Medicaid. Is that program still fully funded? Is it expanding? Is it contracting?
Well, Medicaid we can talk about a long time.
We can't. But
it's a system that's full of holes. There is a ton of fraud and abuse within that system. And with the President's Affordable Care Act in place, and with the 17 or 18 changes that he has taken upon himself to change by executive order, it's completely out of control at the state level for those states, Illinois being one, that have said, yes, we will be a part of the Affordable Care Act.
Can you give it one example or two examples of what you mean by full of fraud?
Well, yeah, we're first of all, let's start, and now I'm going to back up again. We've enrolled people in Illinois who rightfully can enroll, but after they enrolled, they haven't paid their premiums. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Lee Presser might have to pick up somebody's bill if you were living in Illinois. All right. The Navigator program, which we have in place to enroll people, has non-professional people acting as insurance agents to bring people into the system, and they're doing it using improper facts. And most of these people who come to the system and can't qualify or don't qualify for one reason or another end up being pushed over into the Medicaid arena. And Medicaid right now in the state of Illinois, although we get help from the government, is very stressed. With respect to fraud itself, I know as a fact that the audits that should be done and referred to the state police for criminal investigation are zero. And I have examples, one after one after one, 10 after 10 after 10, hundreds of examples of where providers have built the state for thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in various areas, and the state, and that's the OIG, Office of Inspector General, has done nothing. Now, if you want to save money, you better bring some, and this might be good advice for Governor Rauner if he becomes governor. If you want to save money, you need a fraud unit that works out of the executive department and goes in and makes sure that the OIGs do their job, because we're losing a lot of money that could be going to schools and roads and various other things.
We got about a minute or two left
Sure.
here, and I always want to give people, if they have something to talk about that we haven't said, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think you've covered a lot of ground. We have, again, spent another year not addressing the real problems within the state.
Which are?
Well, we can't fund our schools, and we lay teachers off. We can't provide the special education that we need, and that's simply wrong. Now we have a pension problem because with the most recent decision in the case that took on the General Assembly's passing of a bill and signed by the governor that said we no longer have to pay for teachers' benefit packages, in other words, insurance. That's been ruled unconstitutional. So you can all that are listening to the show figure that now we're going to have to pick up the teachers' pension programs fully. I think that's a fair assumption. So now we're really out of whack because what was predicted to be savings is no longer there. So now the liabilities that we had and we were predicting down the road are greater, because I think the Supreme Court is going to come in and they're going to say you can't diminish state pensions.
Thank you very much for being with us
Absolutely.
today. Looking forward to having you back
Thank
for a
you.
continuing report on the state of
Great.
Illinois.
Thanks very
Thank you.
much.
You're very welcome. I've been speaking with Dwight Kay. He's a state representative, an Illinois state representative representing District 112, which is in southern Illinois, Metro East, on the other side of the river from St. Louis. We appreciate him being here with us. This program is going to be uploaded to YouTube. If you want to show this program to some of your friends, go to YouTube and take a look. I'm Lee Presser. Thank you. See you next time.